Hey, it's Matt here from Matt McLaughlin Battlefield Tours, and it's time for some 5-minute history. Today, a really fascinating one. How did World War I start? Thank you so much for joining me. On this channel, we do everything to do with history, from walking the great battlefields of the world to exploring the how, whys and wheres of some of the most important moments in history. If you're new here, consider subscribing. World War I was the bloody opening chapter of a very violent 20th century, and it marked the transition from the empires of the past to the modern world we know today. In any study of the origins of the First World War, you're going to come across this guy, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His assassination in June 1914 was the spark that ignited the First World War, but don't be fooled into thinking that this event was the only cause of the war. Now, this was a really complicated period in history. It was a time of great alliances and empires. To fully understand what was going on, we have to go back decades before 1914. From the late 1800s, the great empires of Europe were manoeuvring for war. The vast empires that had shaped world history for centuries were waning, and in a last gasp to hold on to as much power and territory as possible, they began forming alliances. The Germans and Austro-Hungarians on one side, known as the Central Powers, and France, Russia and Britain on the other, known as the Entente Powers. They agreed to support each other in the event that one of them was attacked. These main players also had a number of junior partners, including Serbia, who was aligned to the Entente, and Bulgaria, who was aligned to the Central Powers. Eventually, the war would drag in nations from across the globe, from Japan to the USA and all the Commonwealth countries, such as Australia, New Zealand and Canada. But in 1914, the blame for the outbreak of war can be placed squarely on the shoulders of those major European players. These European alliances were backed up by huge military forces. This was the original arms race, with both sides rapidly expanding their land and sea forces to counter the growing threat from their enemies. The theory was that this would act as a deterrent to each side, but in reality, the presence of two huge armies on each other's doorstep made a war almost impossible to avoid. The spark that lit the fire was the assassination of Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, on June 28, 1914. Serbian nationals had grand plans of uniting the Balkans, and a key part of that plan was ending the Austro-Hungarian rule of Bosnia. Through a leap of logic, they decided that knocking off the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne was just the sort of PR that their movement needed. Now, the Austro-Hungarians were understandably outraged that their future ruler had been shot dead on the streets of Sarajevo, and they accused the Serbian government of playing a part in the assassination. They issued a set of ultimatums to the Serbians, which were effectively impossible to accept, thereby setting the stage for war. Serbia, however, had a big and powerful friend in Russia, who was not going to stand by and watch the Austro-Hungarians rampaging on its doorstep. The nervous Austro-Hungarians reached out to their own powerful friend, Germany, asking for support if Russia stepped in. The response from the Germans was pretty straightforward. "We will support you no matter what." This was the famous blank check that gave Austro-Hungary the confidence to declare war on Serbia. From there, the dominoes started falling fairly quickly. The alliances dictated that once one partner was at war, they all were. Austro-Hungary declares war on Serbia, Russia mobilises against Austro-Hungary, Germany declares war on Russia, and then, knowing that France would stand with Russia, declares war on her too. Within a few weeks, the great powers of Europe were at war. Only Britain had resisted joining the fray, but this was about to change too. Germany had long suspected that war was inevitable and had a plan in its pocket for swift victory over the French. Known as the Schlieffen Plan, it involved advancing swiftly into France, capturing Paris and knocking the French out of the war. But to outflank the French, the German army had to march through Belgium, a country that had declared itself neutral and was therefore not supposed to be involved in the war at all. For decades, Britain had promised to protect Belgian neutrality, so was now obliged to come to the rescue. The British gave the Germans 2 days to clear out of Belgium, and when they failed to respond, declared war on August 4. Now, just as a side note, the British reasons for fighting in World War I are often misunderstood. Sure, they weren't happy to see the Germans rampaging through Western Europe, but the catalyst for going to war was the German occupation of Belgium. With Britain in the war, her imperial cousins joined in as well, with Australia, Canada, New Zealand, India and South Africa all throwing their hats into the ring. The Ottoman Empire soon joined in with the Central Powers, and by 1917 even the USA was involved. In no time at all, a European squabble had become a world war. So there you have it. The Entente powers of France, Russia and Britain, and the Central powers of Germany and Austro-Hungary demonstrated conclusively that if you amass millions of armed men on your enemy's borders, you will start a war. Who would have thought? And the result? Europe was destroyed, empires collapsed, and more than 10 million people were killed. In addition, the seeds were sown for the Second World War, which began only 25 years after the First War ended. The world would never be the same again. So that's the start of World War I in just 5 minutes. It's a very complicated but also a very important moment in history, so I hope you enjoyed it. I'm Matt McLaughlin, and thank you so much for joining me on this journey through history. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. And until next time, thanks for watching.